No one in the small town of Pine River expected the ground beneath their boots to shake, not from an earthquake, but from an economic tremor that began thousands of miles away. But on the cold morning of March 17th, 2030, every Canadian woke up to the same breaking headline. Global silver shortage declared, Canada hit first. Imagine that. One day, life is normal. The next, the entire country is on the brink. For most people, silver was just silver. It was jewelry, old coins, maybe that fancy cutlery your grandma only used on special occasions. But for Noah Clark, a 39-year-old mining engineer with 2 kids and a mortgage that already felt like a backpack full of rocks, silver was something else entirely. It was a warning he had been shouting from the rooftops for years. But nobody listened. They called him paranoid, a doomsayer. Now they were seeing the truth. Factories that once hummed with life fell silent overnight. The machines needed silver for their electronics, and there was none left. Bank lines stretched for entire city blocks, people desperate to pull out whatever cash they could, only to find the vaults were just as empty as their hopes. Canada's proud resource towns, the backbone of the nation, descended into chaos and panic. The supply chains had snapped. The economy was in freefall. This wasn't just a financial slump. This was something far more terrifying. This was a reckoning. And Canada, a nation rich in natural resources, was somehow ground zero for a crisis that would soon engulf the entire world. The story of the Great Silver Crash begins not with a bang, but with a whisper. For decades, the world had been consuming silver at an unsustainable rate. It's not just for coins and jewelry anymore. Silver is a critical component in almost every piece of modern technology. Your phone, your laptop, the solar panels on your roof, the electric car in your driveway, they all need silver to function. It's one of the most conductive metals on the planet, an irreplaceable part of our digital age. And for years, we were using more of it than we were mining. Experts like Noah saw the data. They saw the dwindling mine outputs, the shrinking stockpiles, the desperate scramble by industries to secure what was left. They warned governments, they published papers, they pleaded with financial institutions. But the machine of global commerce kept churning, ignoring the red lights flashing on its own dashboard. It was a classic case of kicking the can down the road, assuming someone else would figure it out. Well, the road just ran out. Why Canada first? Simple. Canada was one of the world's major silver producers. When its mines started to dry up faster than anticipated, it sent a shockwave through the global market. It was the first domino to fall. Suddenly, the contracts Canada couldn't fulfill meant a factory in Germany couldn't produce circuit boards, which meant an automaker in Japan couldn't finish its cars, which meant a dealership in America had nothing to sell. A complex, interconnected global economy was unraveling because of one single shiny element. Back in Pine River, Noah watched the chaos unfold. He wasn't surprised, just heartbroken. He saw his neighbors, good, hard-working people, lose their jobs, their savings, their sense of security. The local grocery store started rationing food. The gas station ran dry. The friendly waves between neighbors were replaced with suspicious glances. Fear was the new currency, and it was everywhere. This wasn't just an economic crisis anymore. It was a societal one. The invisible threads that hold our communities together were fraying. The trust we place in our systems, in our government, in our banks, in our supply chains was evaporating. Noah realized the truth with a chilling certainty. Surviving this wasn't going to be about money or stocks. It was going to be about resilience, community, and relearning the skills our grandparents took for granted. The crisis forced a brutal question upon everyone. What is truly valuable? Is it the number in your bank account, which could disappear in an instant? Or is it the ability to grow your own food, to fix what's broken, to rely on your neighbors? The Great Silver Crash stripped away the illusion of modern life and exposed the fragile foundation it was built on. Noah, The man everyone had ignored now found his small community looking to him for answers. He had been preparing for this, not as a doomsday prepper, but as a practical engineer who understood systems. He knew that when one system fails, you have to build another. He started organizing. He taught people how to purify water, how to set up small-scale power grids, how to pool resources and skills. He knew that the only way out was through. They had to rebuild from the ground up, starting with their own small town. The story of the Great Silver Crash is a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that the resources we depend on are finite, and our technological progress has a physical cost. It is a story about what happens when we ignore the warnings and push our planet past its limits. But it's also a story of hope. It's about the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It's about people like Noah Clarke, who, in the face of collapse, chose not to despair, but to build something new. It's a lesson that true wealth isn't found in a mine, but in the strength of our communities. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're not talking about a distant, apocalyptic fantasy. We're talking about something real, something tangible, something that could be happening right under our feet. This is the story of how one simple metal, something you probably have in your pocket right now, could bring a modern nation to its knees. Our story begins in Sudbury, Ontario, the heart of Canada's mining country. This is the world of Noah Clarke, a man who spent his life listening to rocks. To most people, a rock is just a rock. But to Noah, a geologist with 2 decades of experience, every mineral held a secret, a story, a consequence. And for years, the rocks had been telling him one thing, a warning he passed on to his bosses, to anyone who would listen. Silver demand is rising faster than we can dig it, he'd say. One supply shock, and Canada will feel it first. They didn't just ignore him. They laughed. Politicians filed his memos away, unread. The big mining corporations? They kept exporting silver as if the earth's pockets were bottomless. But beneath the quiet, snow-covered hills of Sudbury, the numbers told a different story. The numbers were undeniable. Think about it. Where is silver? It's in every solar panel soaking up the sun. It's a critical component in every electric car battery. It's inside the smartphone in your hand and the medical sensors that keep us healthy. And now, it's even in the new AI chips powering the world's insatiable data centers. Silver isn't just a precious metal for jewelry anymore. It's the lifeblood of the 21st century economy. And Canada, one of the world's most trusted suppliers, had been quietly bleeding out its reserves. We were shipping it away faster than we could possibly replace it, betting our future on a resource we treated as infinite. It was a ticking time bomb, and Noah Clarke was one of the few who could hear the clock. While Noah was fighting this professional battle, his life at home was already feeling the strain. His wife, Claire, a nurse, was working double shifts just to keep their heads above water. Their son, Ethan, needed a new laptop for high school, a basic necessity that felt like a luxury. Their daughter, Lily, dreamed of playing hockey, but the league fees kept climbing higher and higher each season. Does any of this sound familiar? It was the slow, grinding pressure that Canada's middle class was already under, long before the silver shock hit. Noah felt it every time he swiped his card at the grocery store, watching the total climb higher for the same basket of food. The cost of living was a quiet crisis, cracking the foundations of families like his across the country. One evening, walking home past Main Street, Noah looked at the growing number of shuttered local shops, the "For Lease" signs becoming a permanent fixture of the landscape. He turned to Claire and said, his voice low, "We're living on borrowed time. All of us. Something big is coming." Claire, exhausted from another 16-hour day at the hospital, squeezed his hand. "Noah, we've been through recessions before. We're strong. We'll get through this too." But Noah knew, deep in his gut, this time was different. This wasn't just another economic cycle. This was a structural break. The foundation itself was about to give way. and it all came to a head on one specific day. The day everything changed was March 17th, 2030. It started with a single press release. The world's largest electronics manufacturer, a titan of the industry, announced they could no longer secure the silver needed for their production lines. They were pausing operations. It was the first domino, and it fell hard. Overnight, the world seized up. Tech plants went dark. Car factories that relied on thousands of electronic components halted their assembly lines. Solar energy companies, the darlings of the green transition, froze all new orders. And most frighteningly, medical device manufacturers sounded the alarm. They were running out of essential components. And because Canada exported more silver relative to its economic size than any other major nation, the shockwave hit us first and hardest. The global problem became a Canadian catastrophe almost instantly. Within hours, the market price of silver didn't just rise. It went vertical. It was a panic. Within days, to prevent a total collapse, banks limited withdrawals. You couldn't get your own money out. Within weeks, the government in Ottawa called an emergency session, but they were already far behind the curve. For Noah, watching from the epicenter in Sudbury, it was surreal. The town he knew, a proud, hard-working mining community, transformed into a frontline battlefield of economic chaos. The problem wasn't a lack of jobs. It was a lack of everything else. The supply chains broke. Suddenly, the vague threat of inflation became the stark reality of empty shelves. Families started stockpiling supplies, and a quiet panic descended. The grocery aisles were cleared out in a matter of days. Canned goods, bottled water, pasta all gone. Then came the layoff notices. They arrived like a brutal winter storm, burying households in debt and despair. The very mines that had been shipping silver out were now shutting down because the global economy they supplied had ground to a halt. Noah watched it all unfold, his town, his country, his world, collapsing around him. And the cause wasn't a war, or a plague, or a natural disaster. It was a metal. A simple, shiny metal that everyone took for granted. The very thing he had spent his life studying, the very thing he had warned everyone about, was now the instrument of their ruin. The crisis was no longer an abstract economic theory for him. It became deeply personal. That same month, Noah's father suffered a severe stroke. They rushed him to the hospital, the place where Claire worked, the place that was supposed to be a sanctuary of healing. But the sanctuary was also a victim of the crisis. The hospital's advanced imaging machines, the ones needed to see what was happening inside his father's brain, were all reliant on silver-coated components. And those components were now scarcer than gold. The hospital was rationing their use. Claire found Noah in the hallway, her face pale, her voice shaking with a mix of professional duty and personal terror. They said there's only one working unit today, and there's a line. We have to wait. Wait. His father's life was hanging in the balance, and they had to wait, because of silver. In that moment, everything broke for Noah. The weight of his ignored warnings, the sight of his town's suffering, the financial strain on his family, and now, the life of his own father, hanging by a thread, it all came crashing down on him. This wasn't about numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. This wasn't about geology reports or corporate profits. This was life and death. His family's life was being strangled by the very crisis he saw coming. He looked at his wife's desperate face. He thought of his father lying in a hospital bed, and a fire ignited inside him. He had spent years trying to warn the people in charge. The government, the corporations he had trusted the system. And the system had failed utterly and completely. He looked at Claire and realized waiting was no longer an option. Waiting for the government to act, waiting for the companies to fix it, that was a fool's game. In that sterile hospital corridor, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and the smell of antiseptic, Noah Clark made a decision. He couldn't wait for someone else to be the hero. He had to do something. He had to fight back. And he knew exactly where to start. Imagine a world without your phone, your car, or even the lights in your hospital. It sounds like a scene from a disaster movie, right? But what if I told you it could all grind to a halt because of one thing? Something we use every day and barely think about: silver. This isn't just a story about a precious metal. It's a story about what happens when the invisible backbone of our modern world suddenly snaps. It all began on a Tuesday morning. The news hit like a tidal wave. A sudden, catastrophic collapse in the global silver supply chain. It wasn't a financial crash you could see on a stock ticker. It was a physical one. The metal essential for everything from electronics and solar panels to medical equipment and water purifiers had vanished from the market. Overnight, Canada, like the rest of the world, was paralyzed. Factories went silent. Hospitals began rationing critical diagnostic tools. The hum of daily life faded into an anxious quiet. In the middle of this growing chaos lived the Clark family, a typical Canadian household, suddenly finding their lives upended. Noah, a geologist, saw his industry evaporate. His wife, Claire, a nurse, watched in horror as her hospital's supply of silver-infused bandages and surgical instruments dwindled. Their kids, Lily and Ethan, saw their world of online classes and hockey practice disappear. Fear was a constant guest at their dinner table. The government was scrambling. International partners were hoarding what little they had. And for the average person, it felt like the world was crumbling with no one to catch them. But Noah Clark wasn't the type to just sit and wait for disaster. He saw the panic in his neighbor's eyes and the desperation in his wife's voice. And he knew waiting for someone else to fix this wasn't an option. He started making calls. He didn't call politicians or CEOs. He called the people he knew. A small group of local miners, grizzled engineers, sharp geologists, and even the high school science teacher who had a knack for creative problem solving. These were ordinary Canadians, the kind of people who know how to fix a generator in a blizzard and didn't back down from a challenge. Their mission was simple, but incredibly bold. It wasn't about getting rich or hoarding resources. It was about survival. It was about rebuilding Canada's silver lifeline from the ground up, piece by piece. They gave themselves a name that echoed the rugged resilience of their homeland: the Boreal Initiative. Their plan wasn't born in a fancy boardroom. It was sketched out on a coffee-stained map in Noah's garage. It had 3 core steps. First, they would identify and map all the abandoned silver deposits that had been ignored for decades. Canada's vast northern wilderness was littered with old mines, forgotten places where silver once glimmered. Using modern data technology and old-timers' knowledge, they believed they could find what others had missed. Second, they had to innovate. They couldn't rely on the massive, expensive machinery of the past. They needed to develop new, cheaper, and more eco-friendly ways to get the silver out. They talked about using AI to map deposits more accurately, developing low-impact drilling techniques, and even pioneering methods to recycle microsilver from mountains of old, discarded electronics. Whatever they could think of, they were willing to try. And third, they would create a national recycling pipeline. Noah knew that silver wasn't just buried deep underground. It was sitting in the junk drawers, forgotten jewelry boxes, and landfills of millions of Canadian homes. If they could mobilize the public, they could turn that forgotten treasure into a national resource. At first, the world outside their small circle was skeptical. The news anchors talked about geopolitical solutions and corporate bailouts. The idea of a few locals with old maps and big ideas solving a global crisis? People laughed. They called them dreamers, or worse, fools. But then, something incredible started to happen. The laughter faded, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. People realized this wasn't a crisis someone else was going to solve for them. The change was slow, then all at once. A trucker, his rig sitting idle, volunteered to move equipment north for free. University students, sent home from their now closed campuses, started organizing silver recovery workshops in their communities, teaching people how to safely extract silver from old cell phones and laptops. Retired miners, men with decades of hard-won wisdom etched into their faces, showed up at the initiative's makeshift headquarters, offering their knowledge of the land and the rock. Canada's north, usually a place of quiet solitude, transformed into a landscape of desperate innovation and raw, unshakable hope. Community halls became planning centers. Garages turned into makeshift labs. It was a grassroots movement born from necessity. Noah Clark, a quiet geologist who just wanted to protect his family, found himself at the center of it all. He never asked to be a leader, but his calm demeanor and unwavering focus inspired everyone around him. Newspapers and blogs started writing about him, giving him a title he never wanted: the man who won to let Canada collapse. The rest of the Clark family found their own ways to fight back. Claire, using her network of healthcare professionals, organized medical groups to lobby the government for emergency imports of life-saving equipment, arguing that every day of delay was a day too long. Lily, their daughter, rallied her hockey team. They couldn't play on the ice, so they held massive recycling drives in the arena's parking lot, collecting old electronics and silverware, their competitive spirit channeled into a new kind of game. And Ethan, their tech-savvy son, put his skills to work. He built an interactive online map that showed scrap silver hotspots across the country, guiding volunteers to the most promising locations for urban mining. For the first time in a long, long time, the Clark family wasn't just bound by fear. They were united by something much bigger, a shared purpose. 2 months into the crisis, everything came to a head. The small-scale recycling and mining efforts were helping, but they were just a bandage on a gaping wound. Canada needed a big win, a major source of silver, to truly turn the tide. All their hopes, all their work, came down to one legendary site, the abandoned Willow Creek mine. For decades, rumors had swirled about this place, whispers of one of the last untapped, high-grade silver veins in all of North America. But it was dangerous. The shafts were flooded, the tunnels were unstable, and no one had dared to venture deep inside for over 50 years. Still, with the country on its knees, desperate times called for desperate measures. Noah, leading a small, hand-picked inspection team of his most experienced miners and engineers, stood at the dark entrance to the mine. The air was cold and damp, carrying the smell of wet earth and forgotten history. As they climbed down into the darkness, their headlamps cutting through the gloom, every footstep echoed with the weight of a nation on their shoulders. They navigated flooded passages and shored up crumbling walls. The silence was absolute, broken only by their own breathing and the drip, drip, drip of water. And then they saw it. At first, it was just a glimmer in the rock. But as they chipped away at the stone, the glimmer grew. It was a vein of pure native silver, shining in their lamplight like a frozen river of moonlight. It was more than they could have ever hoped for. Standing there, deep beneath the earth, covered in mud and sweat, Noah's voice cracked as he spoke into his radio. "We found it." We actually found it. That discovery at Willow Creek didn't end the crisis overnight. It wasn't a magic button, but it was a turning point. It bought Canada time. Precious, invaluable time. Time to restart production, to stabilize the supply lines, and to calm the widespread panic that had threatened to tear the country apart. The river of moonlight from the mine became a river of hope for the entire nation. Months later, the hum of life had returned. Factories were running again. Hospitals were fully supplied, and the immediate threat had passed. Noah Clark stood on the stage of a packed community hall, not as a hero, but as one of them. The room was filled with the faces of the people who had made it all happen. The truckers, the students, the retired miners, the teachers. They were tired, scarred by the ordeal, but their eyes shone with a new kind of strength. Noah looked out at the crowd and said, "Canada survived this shock. Not because our government was prepared, Not because our corporations had a backup plan, but because ordinary people refused to give up. We survived because when we were pushed to the brink, we didn't turn on each other. We turned asterisk to asterisk each other. Let this crisis be a lesson we never forget. Our true wealth, ISNT, buried in the ground, is not in our resources. It's in our people. It's in our unity and in our willingness to face hardship together. And as he finished, the entire hall rose to their feet. The applause wasn't just for him. It was for themselves, for their neighbors, for their country. Because the Great Silver Shock was never really about silver. It was about what happens when a nation forgets the true value of resilience, community, and the quiet strength of ordinary people. And thanks to Noah Clarke and thousands like him, it was a lesson Canada would never, ever forget.